Next Tuesday on 4, Fear on Trial, the story of one man caught up in the hysteria of America's communist witch hunts.
Some guys have put out this thing, calling me a communist.
Now, come on, John.
If they had any evidence, why didn't they give it to the damn FBI if they think I'm conspiring against America?
Nobody's ever sued a blacklister before. Maybe you can win.
Sounds like we're in for a long fight with a short stick.
George C. Scott and William Devane put Fear on Trial next Tuesday at 9 here on 4. After the break, the Channel 4 News from ITN with a report on Mr. Nigel Lawson's proposal for a major shake-up in the banking system.
Every year, the AA helps more motorists in more places than any other motoring organization. On average, we answer one breakdown call every 13 seconds. Well, it's the least you'd expect from the world's largest motoring organization. The AA. Join now. It's great to know you belong. When you're building for the future, try Anglia, the building society that cares about what you want. Oh, a bottle. Oh, bubbles. Oh, the anticipation. Oh, the exhilaration. Oh, Perrier, naturellement. Ghoulies. They'll get you in the end.
Even in these testing conditions, Shaw goes on working. Antiperspirant that won't let you down.
It's her hair, that natural sun-lightened look. She used Sun-In, the gentle lightener for all shades of light brown to blonde hair. So easy to use. Just spray in, then dry. Sun-In lightens with a natural look with either the sun or your hairdryer. So get Sun-In. Apply, blow dry. You're blonder. Sun-In for that natural sun-lightened look.
When you've got a bit of a problem with a gas appliance, call the gas people.
I wonder if you could possibly help. This is Kenway, is it? Is your central heating not working? We'll have to see what we can do about that.
We understand. We care. And we can help.
Mrs. Kenway? I've come to fix your central heating.
Our service engineers are experienced, fully trained, care about their work and how it's done.
It won't give you any more trouble.
Service from the gas people
Cheerio.
isn't just service. It's service with care.
Mr. Wallace?
That's gas service care.
New high-resolution Konica film captures color some films make you pay more for.
Now on 4, we join Peter Sissons and Alistair Stewart at ITN for the Channel 4 News. The time this Thursday, the 20th of June, is 7 o'clock.
Hello, good evening.
The government gives its verdict on the collapse last year of the bankers Johnson Matthey, an appalling and bizarre record of incompetence and mismanagement, but no fraud. And the Chancellor announces major reforms to the banking system, including a new Banking Act. We'll have the details and the reaction. Also tonight, the Beirut hijack. The kidnappers say they'll let newsmen see the hostages. A Scandinavian Philby, this spy goes to jail in Norway for 20 years. And the police bugging over which there are no controls, how they keep track of you and your car. But first, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson, has announced a complete shake-up in the way Britain's banking system is regulated, in the wake of the collapse of Johnson Matthey bankers last autumn. There'll be a new banking law strengthening the powers of the Bank of England. As for Johnson Matthey itself, the auditors who didn't spot the slide towards insolvency, Arthur Young, are being sued by the Bank of England. And the Chancellor criticised the Bank of England for failing to respond more quickly to the danger signals. Mr. Lawson told the Commons that the bank's governor, Mr. Robin Lee Pemberton, had acted properly in rescuing Johnson Matthey. Damien Green looks at the banking scandal that has rocked the City of London.
The dramatic weekend rescue of Johnson Matthey bankers last September was the biggest banking crisis to hit the city for 10 years. On Saturday, September the 29th, the Bank of England assembled clearing bankers, gold bullion dealers, Johnson Matthey directors and anxious shareholders. To prevent a crisis of confidence in the whole British banking system, they had to rescue Johnson Matthey before the Hong Kong markets opened on Monday morning. Johnson Matthey have been gold dealers since 1817. They're one of the 5 firms who fix the price of gold twice a day. So the other bullion dealers were desperate that the losses of the banking arm shouldn't spill over into the bullion operations. But even more important was the possible knock-on effect on other banks of JMB's huge losses. Johnson Matthey's doubtful loans added up to nearly £250 million, more than half its total lending. The bank itself had only £70 million of capital. So the parent company put in another £50 million, the bullion dealers and, rather reluctantly, the clearing banks found another £75 million, and so did the Bank of England, which later added another £100 million, a use of public money which has proved extremely controversial. The Treasury wasn't pleased about rescuing a lame duck, even a vital financial one, and the Chancellor wasn't even informed until the rescue had been put into place. The bank's point that it was not taxpayers' money being used, as it has its own funds, didn't reduce Treasury anger. And Labour MPs such as Dennis Skinner pointed up the irony of a government not willing to preserve uneconomic pits putting money into a failing bank. The city itself was severely embarrassed. The documents published this afternoon reveal a series of disastrous errors. Johnson Matthey bankers had no proper internal management controls and lent far too much money to 2 groups. The Bank of England didn't get the right information in time because the information it was getting from Johnson Matthey was simply incorrect. So no one took the necessary decisions or action early enough to stop the drift into insolvency. The bank's whole system of supervision of the banking system, based on trust of auditors and bank managers, fell down. The committee set up to stop this happening again has recommended abolishing the distinction between banks and the more heavily supervised licensed deposit takers, employing more Bank of England supervisors, and stopping a bank lending more than 25% of its capital base to one customer. But has the report aimed at the right targets?
The report clearly feels very strongly that the auditors did a bad job, and I can understand their feeling on that. The only thing I was surprised at in the report is how little information the supervisors had. They seem to be relying to a large extent on public information, and the public information given by Johnson Matthey was totally inadequate.
Do you think the solutions proposed by the review committee will be effective in stopping this kind of disaster again?
I think they'll be helpful. You can never legislate against incompetence. Where you get incompetent people, mistakes will be made, and that really is a message of Johnson Matthey.
Does the report show some incompetence within the Bank of England, which is there on the Chancellor's behalf to stop problems emerging?
Well, of course, they're not there on my behalf. They have their own separate statutory responsibility for the supervision of banks. And certainly what this event shows, and it's useful to draw the lessons, what this event shows is that, first of all, the auditors fell down on the job, the auditors, the Johnson Matthey bankers, the accountants, and they are being sued. Legal action is being taken against them. What it also shows is that the Bank of England didn't on this occasion maintain their normal standards of supervision, and they are strengthening the supervision department of the bank in order to deal with that in future, and that the legal framework is not really adequate, and that's why I'm going to introduce, for the following consultation, a bill making important changes in the supervisory framework.
Why doesn't the government take over the role of self-regulation and use your own Treasury officials to make sure that this city centre, this world city centre, functions properly and honestly?
We don't have officials who are experienced in banking supervision. It's an art and a skill of its own. The Bank of England does. It has always done this job. What it needs to do, we believe, is to strengthen its effectiveness in this role.
Heads have rolled at Johnson Matthey. Will they roll at the Bank of England?
Certain changes have taken place. The particular manager who was responsible for supervising Johnson Matthey at the bank has been removed from the supervisory division altogether, and the governor, but it's his responsibility, may well decide that some further changes are needed. We'll have to see.
Will this incident prove to be a setback to the city's hopes for self-regulation?
No, I don't think so. I don't think this has got anything to do, anyhow, with the self-regulation which is at issue over the stocks and shares side, the securities side of the city, and that we're setting up in what I think will be an effective form in separate legislation to come forward. This is a matter of the banking system, and I think it's acknowledged worldwide that this is, if one of the couple of banking centres, probably the banking centre of the world, on the whole an excellent record, but this occasion has pointed to defects, and we're going to put them right. But there always have been, in any country in the world, you care to name the United States here, there always have been from time to time banks who do get into trouble through incompetence, sometimes fraud, although in this case there's no evidence of fraud. Regrettably that is the case. The important thing is to nip them in the bud, catch them early.
Well, with us now is a member of the opposition team that shadows Nigel Lawson, Tony Blair. Will the Chancellor's remedies have opposition backing?
Well, the Chancellor's remedies will have opposition backing to this extent that we believe that there are lessons that can be learned from the Johnson Matthey affair, and we believe there should be a tightening up of supervision. In particular, we think that auditors should be given a duty to disclose to the Bank of England information which is necessary in circumstances where there may be a collapse of a particular bank.
That is proposed by the Chancellor, is it not?
Well, it's not clear whether he's proposing simply a power or a right on the auditors to do that. We would like to go further and make the auditors actually have a duty to go to the Bank of England if they think that anything may be wrong. Now, those things are very important, and we will support the government if they consult with us fully in doing that, because it's in our interest, as it's in the interest of everybody, to make sure the banking system acts properly. What we have said, though, in relation to Johnson Matthey today, and what I repeat now, is that we cannot allow the Chancellor and the Bank of England to get away with saying that the problem here was simply inadequate powers on the part of the Bank of England. If they had used adequately the powers they already had, then Johnson Matthey would not have occurred.
Well, then, do you think that enough retribution has been meted out inside the Bank of England?
No, and I've, of course, only seen the Bank of England report today, and so haven't had an opportunity to study it in detail, but I think that it is sadly lacking in self-criticism. It fails to deal with the events leading up to the Johnson Matthey collapse in the detail that we require, and in particular it fails to say why it is that the warning signals were not read ages ago by the Bank of England. Now, the loan book of Johnson Matthey, for example, doubled between mid-1982 and mid-1984. It was perfectly obvious that the geographical spread of the loans to particular individuals, the warning lights were all flashing, and yet action wasn't taken. Now, they haven't dealt adequately with that.
If we had a Labour Chancellor now receiving this report from the bank, would he sack the governor?
Well, I don't think we would ever have appointed this particular government in the first place, because, of course, it was very much a Conservative, indeed prime ministerial appointment. But there is no way, I think, that we can retain confidence in a governor who not merely allows the supervisory department of the Bank of England to be run in this way, but who has been engaged, along with other people in the Bank of England, in concealing information from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in particular what happened to £100 million loaned on deposit by the Bank of England to Johnson Matthey bankers, which meant that the Chancellor, when he gave his first account of this matter to the House of Commons back in December '84, gave an inadvertently misleading account of it.
Why is it that Labour, which had to tangle when it was last in government with a whole secondary banking crisis, didn't do any of these things, left the present system untouched and in place?
Well, of course we didn't. We introduced the Banking Act of 1979. And one point that's worth making is that when the Banking Act of 1979 was going to the House of Commons, then the Conservatives, if anything, were saying that the Bank of England was being given too much power. And it was Labour that was questioning whether the Bank of England shouldn't have more power. But I think, you know, you obviously learn from experience. And all the way through, I and other Treasury spokesmen have made it absolutely clear that there are lessons that we can learn, and we will support the government and legislation to deal with those lessons. But let's not have, as Roy Hattersley said earlier today, the particular facts of Johnson Matthey swept under the Bank of England's carpet.
Tony Blair, thank you very much. Now to the Middle East, where in the Lebanon, the hijack continues. It'll be a week tomorrow since the TWA flight from Athens to Rome was taken over by Shiite Muslim extremists. Tonight, the leader of the Shiite Amal militia, Nabi Berri, is promising to show some of the 40 American hostages to journalists in Beirut, apparently in an effort to disprove allegations of ill treatment. In Europe, both the Swiss and the Austrians have offered to try to help mediate. Later tonight in America, President Reagan will meet the chairman of the International Red Cross in the hope they may be able to play some role. But on the tarmac of Beirut Airport, the situation is apparently unchanged. Channel 4 News' reporter Edward Sturton is there.
The talk of negotiation did little to change things on the ground in Beirut. The TWA jet remained on the tarmac, guarded by Amal militiamen, and the whereabouts of the hostages is still a closely kept secret. There's been a steady flow of conversation between the hijackers and the airport control tower. During the night, the gunmen asked for more food to be brought on board and for the plane to be cleaned, again threatening to blow it up if their demands weren't met. The hijackers opened fire on journalists at the airport this morning. It happened after a Lebanese journalist drove up to the plane in a food van disguised as an airport attendant. One of the hijackers spotted his camera and they began shooting. No one was hurt, but it gives some indication of just how high the tension is running here. Much of the attention today focused on talks going on at the home of the Amal leader, Nabi Berri. During the morning, he was visited by diplomats from the French and Swiss embassies and by the Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, his most powerful ally in West Beirut. Later, he also met with the senior Amal leader, Hakif Haidar. Mr. Haidar later held a press conference presenting the moderate and reasonable face that Amal want the world to see. But his news wasn't encouraging. He said that the hostages were well and Amal knew their whereabouts, but that they were under the direct control of the hijackers and weren't being held jointly with Amal as had been thought. It's very difficult to know now just how much control Amal has over the hostages' fate. They're clearly being held in Amal-controlled territory of Beirut, so they can't be moved around without Amal's cooperation. But beyond that, it does increasingly seem that the hijackers themselves are taking decisions about what should happen to the hostages. And that means that anyone who negotiates in this crisis won't always know who they're negotiating with. Edward Sturton, ITN, Beirut.
Later, the Amal leader, Nabi Berri, repeated that all that was needed to solve the crisis was an instruction from the United States to Israel to free the Shiite prisoners. He denied that his Amal militia had had anything to do with the hijacking, but he did say he felt responsible for the hostages' fate.
I have guarantee from the hijacking. They will not harm anyone during all the discussion between me and the others to release the people.
And if the American government says no negotiations on an exchange of people from the plane for people from Israeli prisons, what happens? What happens if the negotiations collapse?
I am mediator. I have to study my situation in that case. Maybe I will give up.
What happens when you give up?
Well, for that I want to study what will happen, because I don't want anyone to harm in the same time. I have my responsibility.
This week, international terrorism has taken a terrible toll, and a few hours ago, President Reagan said that we have reached our limit. He was speaking after a conference with his chief aides and heads of the security services in Washington, where they considered not just the hostage crisis and the Frankfurt bomb, but also last night's murder of Americans in El Salvador. There,